We started the series that we're in, this Ready series, by recognising that God seems to be stirring something in our nation. The spiritual atmosphere is changing, and people, particularly young people, are waking up to God and coming to faith. And we need to be ready to respond and to join in with what God is doing. Our framework for the series has been Genesis 26, where God promises to pour out blessing on Isaac. And Isaac responds by building an altar, digging a well, and pitching a tent. So far, we've looked at building altars, altar being a place where we bring our confession of sin, the reality of our pain, and our offering of praise. We've looked at digging wells, and particularly digging wells of holiness, working with God to become more holy and more fruitful. And today we look at the third one of those images, at pitching tents. Pitching a tent could be about all sorts of things, really, but it's about, first of all, putting down roots. It's an act of faithful commitment to God. It's creating a place of habitation. A place of habitation, first and foremost, for God, but also for others to come and find God for themselves. If you're looking for a tent story in Scripture, there are a number of different places you could go, and we're going to go to the story of David. And our guide through that story this morning is some great teaching from Tyler Staton. So let's read our passage from 2 Samuel chapter 6. 2 Samuel chapter 6. And verses 12 to 17. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." So David went down and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. David, wearing a linen ephod, danced before the Lord with all his might, while he and the entire household of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of trumpets. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let's zoom out a little bit. 7 years before that scene took place, David was anointed king of Israel, but his path to the throne was, shall we say, quite eventful. Israel's first king, Saul, felt so threatened by David that he spent a good chunk of his time trying to hunt David down and to kill him. Finally, after Saul's death, David was anointed king. But then Ishbosheth, one of Saul's sons, moved into the palace uninvited, surrounded it with an army, and took the throne by force. Which means David has been living in a small town in the countryside, waiting for this imposter to get out. And he's been waiting for 7 years. That's a lot of time to daydream about his royal entrance into the city. It's plenty of time for David to come up with a strong political strategy. And this is what makes David's entrance into the city so surprising. The passage we just read is David's long-awaited royal parade, his coronation day, his triumphal entry. No doubt people heard him coming before they could even see the parade. An entire army of people was marching and singing a song that David himself had composed for the occasion. We've heard the lyrics of it a moment ago in our second Bible reading. We call it Psalm 24. Lift up your heads, you gates. Be lifted up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. That sounds about right, doesn't it, for the arrival of the new king? But it continues. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. And at this point, the crowd are thinking, hang on a minute, so David isn't the King of glory. What's that about? Has he made a mistake? Well, it's not a typo. If anything, that's the chorus of the song that he's written, because David repeats that line in the psalm. Lift up your heads, you gates. Lift them up, you ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is he, this King of glory? The Lord Almighty. He is the King of glory. King David's grand entrance song is praising the King, but it's not King David. The Lord Almighty, he is the King of glory. That's what he wants the crowds to sing, and that's what the crowds could hear. A slightly strange choice, but any minute now they're going to catch a glimpse of this king in all his splendour. And they would have expected to see a long march of soldiers and heralds, with the king being carried along on a platform, sitting on his throne, decorated in royal robes and wearing a heavy crown on his head. Some of them will have seen exactly that sort of spectacle when Saul arrived as their king years before. That's what they were waiting to see. What they actually saw was David, their new king, at the front of the parade on foot, wearing a linen ephod, and he's dancing. David's chosen outfit for this big day was a linen ephod, not the expected royal robe and a crown. An ephod was a priestly garment, not a political one. And it wasn't the dignified outer robe either. It was the undergarment of a priest. David was symbolically saying to the nation, look, I'm not a king who is coming to sit on a throne. I'm a priest who is coming to lead you into the presence of God. But as it is, I'm the least of all priests. I'm not even qualified to wear the robes and the tassels. The new king comes in and he's singing a song of praise to God, and he's dancing in a priest's underwear. Now, at the same time, there is something being carried on a kind of platform at the back of the parade. But it's not a throne for David to sit on. It's a throne with the Ark of the Covenant on it. The Ark was a sacred wooden box carried by the Israelites during the Exodus. It symbolized God's presence with them. This box represented the intersection between heaven and earth, and they carried it with them through the desert. When God's people eventually took the promised land, it was the ark that led the procession through the parted waters of the River Jordan. But once the people were settled in the land, they got comfortable, and King Saul left the Ark of the Covenant in a foreign field. How often does that tend to happen? How often do we tend to leave God behind when we get comfortable? It's one of the main reasons I think that the church grows the fastest in places in the world where there is persecution and hardship because of their faith. Because there is no opportunity to get comfortable with the reality of following Jesus in a broken and hurting world. Anyway, David hunted down the ark. He realized its importance, and he placed it on the throne. God, the true king, on the seat of honor. David, the dancing priest, celebrating God's return to his people, not his own coronation. Well, then David and the procession, they arrive at the town square where David has pitched a tent in the city centre, right outside the palace doors. And this tent is a lot like Moses' tent of meeting, the place where Moses used to go in and speak face to face with God, like you and I would speak with a friend. David puts the ark back in the tent. It's referred to with that word tabernacle. Now, don't picture something grand and decorative when you hear that word. The English word tabernacle translates the Hebrew word sukkah, which means a booth or a shelter. It was an unimpressive, makeshift, temporary shelter. Something like what we would call a tent today. So this is it. This is David's big idea. After 7 years of waiting and dreaming, his big idea is this. What if we pitched a tent? A tent where anyone and everyone can come to worship and pray. Nothing fancy, just a common space at the centre of the city for prayer. We know, don't we, that when a new prime minister is elected, they usually have a thing that they want to tackle immediately. It's often something that they've promised to voters, a pet project, something that is going to define their legacy. Well, David's very first act, on his very first day as Israel's king, at least in public, was to reconstruct Moses' tent of meeting in the city centre. And you can sort of imagine his advisors trying to get their heads around it. I guess it's a symbolic nod to our history, the Exodus and the story of all of that. Maybe it's celebrating our great leader Moses. Maybe we can sell it that way. But for David, it's clear that this tent is more than a symbol, more than a history lesson. After his entrance, David went into the palace. He sat down with his board of advisors and he laid out the grand plan. David hired 288 worship leaders, prophets and elders who would pray and worship in that tent, most likely 24 hours a day around the clock. If you want to know where I plucked that random number from, you can check out 1 Chronicles 25. David was a king leading a military during an era of tribal warfare. And he's just emptied the national savings account on prayer. Can you imagine that meeting where the advisors get to hear David's strategic plan? And they're thinking, hang on, we need to strengthen our defences against the armies that are literally queuing up all around us. But you want to spend it all on a prayer tent? Yep. And he did. He pitched a tent. A tent where worship and prayer took place around the clock. David put prayer back at the very centre of God's people. And he invited everyone, men and women, slave and free, Israelite and stranger. And it seems that the 33 years of David's kingship might have been the only time before the resurrection that there were no restrictions on access to God's presence. The tent, it seems, was open to all. So this is a vision of prayer back at the centre of God's people. It's a vision of a space consecrated by the prayers of so many who have saturated it in praise and hope and longing after God. I'm sure you felt that, perhaps even as you've come into this building or another church, or particularly a church that's been prayed in for hundreds of years, and you can almost tangibly feel the fact that it is a building that has been prayed in. It's a vision for that kind of a space in the heart of the community. A space that gives birth to a wave of mission that looks something like the kingdom of God set loose on a city. But if we're honest, how often do we really believe in productivity and programs over prayer? We'll launch another initiative, we'll revamp another program, we'll keep ourselves busy with just about anything except prayer. David's first move was to put prayer back at the centre for God's people. And it was either the most admirable or the most ridiculous move a king could make. But here's the thing. Whatever way you measure it, David's rather unconventional time as king was the political high point of Israelite history. Peace and safety in the city. They had a prosperous economy. The poor on the whole were cared for. And what had been a divided kingdom and would be a divided kingdom was unified temporarily. On paper, David's priorities might have looked like a political disaster, but he built his life on prayer, and he chose to put prayer at the centre of the nation, and God took care of everything else. Tyler Staton concludes with this line. He says, the pattern that emerges from David's tent is this: prioritise presence in the church, and you get kingdom in the city. Let me say that again. Prioritise presence in the church, and you get the kingdom in the city. So the invitation to us this week is to pitch a tent, to put prayer and worship at the centre of our own lives, to put prayer and worship at the centre of our church, so that God's kingdom might spill out into the community and across the city.